The Tower of London. March 18, 1554. A 20-year-old woman walks across the cold stones, her red hair tucked beneath a simple hood. Her name is Elizabeth Tudor, and in 4 years, she'll become the greatest monarch England has ever known. Except in the world we're about to explore, she has 4 hours left to live. The executioner is already sharpening his axe. The warrant has been signed. The scaffold is being built in the same spot where her mother, Anne Boleyn, lost her head 18 years ago. One signature from Queen Mary I. That's all it would take. And Mary's advisors are begging her to sign. Welcome to Ash and Crown History. I'm your guide through the moments that shaped our world, and the moments that almost destroyed it. Today we're exploring one of the biggest what-ifs in history. What if Queen Elizabeth I was executed before she ever became queen? What if the woman who would defeat the Spanish Armada, inspire Shakespeare, and build an empire never got the chance? What if the Elizabethan Golden Age, the very foundation of the English-speaking world, was snuffed out before it began? By the end of this video, you'll understand why one woman's survival changed everything, and why her death would have given us a world you wouldn't recognize. Let's go back to March 1554 and watch history balance on a knife's edge. Picture this: London, early spring, 1554. Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, has been on the throne for less than a year. She's 38 years old, and she has a mission: restore Catholic England. Her father, Henry VIII, tore England away from Rome. Her little brother, Edward VI, pushed the nation further into Protestantism. Mary is going to undo it all, by fire if necessary. But she has a problem. A dangerous, brilliant Protestant problem. Her half-sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is 20 years old. Intelligent. Popular with the common people. Protestant. And according to Henry VIII's will, she's Mary's heir. That makes her the most dangerous person in England, because every Protestant who hates Mary's Catholic restoration looks at Elizabeth and sees hope, sees a future where England returns to Protestantism. And some of them are willing to fight for that future. In February 1554, a Protestant nobleman named Thomas Wyatt led a rebellion. 4,000 men marched on London, demanding that Mary abandon her plan to marry Philip II of Spain. The rebellion failed. Wyatt was captured. And under torture, he said something that sealed Elizabeth's fate. He claimed Elizabeth knew about the rebellion, that she'd given it her tacit approval. It was enough. On March 18, 1554, Elizabeth was arrested and taken to the Tower of London through Traitor's Gate, the same water entrance used for condemned prisoners. She knew what it meant. The Tower wasn't a prison. It was a waiting room for the scaffold. Her mother had entered through Traitor's Gate. 3 weeks later, Anne Boleyn was beheaded. Elizabeth's cousin, Lady Jane Grey, had entered through Traitor's Gate just weeks earlier. She was 16 years old when they cut off her head. Now it was Elizabeth's turn. She was locked in the same rooms her mother had occupied, the same rooms where she'd wait for death. Mary's Privy Council was unanimous. Elizabeth must die. Stephen Gardiner, the Lord Chancellor, led the charge. Your Majesty, as long as Elizabeth lives, she will be a focal point for every Protestant rebel in England. Every plot, every conspiracy, they will rally around her name. Simon Renard, the Spanish ambassador, agreed. Philip will never be safe as King of England while the Protestant heir lives. She must be executed. They drafted the warrant. They scheduled the execution. All Mary had to do was sign, and for 3 agonizing weeks she hesitated. Not because she loved Elizabeth. Mary barely knew her. Not because she doubted Elizabeth's guilt. The evidence was circumstantial, but Mary believed it. Mary hesitated because Elizabeth was her sister, her father's daughter, the last living link to the Tudor family, and because killing Elizabeth meant the throne would eventually pass to Mary, Queen of Scots, a French-raised Catholic who'd never even set foot in England. For 3 weeks, Elizabeth sat in the Tower, waiting. In our timeline, the real timeline, Mary never signed the warrant. Elizabeth was eventually released to house arrest. When Mary died in 1558, Elizabeth became queen. The Elizabethan age began. But what if Mary's advisors had been more persuasive? What if the evidence against Elizabeth had been slightly stronger? What if Mary, in a moment of fear or rage or religious conviction, had picked up the quill and signed? Let's find out. It's late at night in Whitehall Palace. Queen Mary sits alone in her chambers, the unsigned warrant in front of her. In the real timeline, she puts it aside. She can't bring herself to sign. But in this timeline, something changes. A message arrives. Another Protestant pamphlet has been found circulating in London. Calls Mary a tyrant. It calls for Elizabeth to be freed and crowned as the rightful queen. It's the final straw. Mary picks up the quill. She signs. "Let it be done quickly," she tells Gardiner. "I will not have England torn apart by my sister's ambitions." The warrant is sealed and sent to the Tower. On March 23, 1554, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Princess Elizabeth Tudor is led out to the scaffold. Unlike her mother, who went to her death with defiant dignity, Elizabeth is shaking. She's 20 years old. She knows she's innocent. She asks to speak. The lieutenant of the Tower nods. Elizabeth's voice is steady, though her hands tremble. "I die a true woman to the Queen, though I have been judged otherwise. I ask only that England remember I loved this realm, and that I would have served it well had I been given the chance." The executioner steps forward. It's over in seconds. The news spreads through London like wildfire. The Protestant community is devastated. Elizabeth had been their hope. The Catholic establishment breathes a sigh of relief. The threat is eliminated. And in France, an 11-year-old girl named Mary Stuart, Mary, Queen of Scots, has just become the uncontested heir to the English throne. The world has changed. Let's watch it unfold. With Elizabeth dead, Mary the First rules unopposed. The Catholic Restoration accelerates. In our timeline, Mary burned about 280 Protestants over 4 years. Horrible, but restrained by the knowledge that her Protestant sister was heir. In this timeline, with no Protestant heir waiting in the wings, Mary has no reason to hold back. Over the next 4 years, nearly 600 Protestants are burned at the stake. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, dies screaming as the flames consume him. Bishops Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley burn together in Oxford, Latimer's famous last words echoing, "We shall this day light such a candle in England as shall never be put out." Except in this timeline, the candle is put out. Protestant churches are seized and returned to Catholic control. The Latin Mass is restored everywhere. Protestantism is driven underground. Thousands of Protestants flee to Europe. They settle in Geneva, in Amsterdam, in German Protestant states. England is bleeding its educated, skilled craftsmen and thinkers. But Mary doesn't care. In her mind, she's saving souls. In July 1554, Mary marries Philip II of Spain in Winchester Cathedral. The English people hate it. They see it as England becoming a Spanish puppet state. And they're not wrong. Philip is the most powerful Catholic monarch in Europe. He sees England as a strategic asset in his war against France and the Protestant states. Mary, desperate for Philip's approval and love, gives him everything he wants. English troops are sent to fight in Philip's wars. English gold funds Spanish campaigns. The people of England grow restless, but with Elizabeth dead, there's no alternative. No rallying point for opposition. Rebellions are crushed before they can gain momentum. By 1558, Mary is 42 years old and dying. Probably uterine cancer, though doctors of the time don't understand it. She has no children. Her phantom pregnancies have been the cruelest joke of all. On her deathbed, she must name an heir. In our timeline, she had no choice. Elizabeth was next in line. In this timeline, there's only one candidate with a legitimate claim: Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. On November 17, 1558, Queen Mary I dies. And Mary Stuart becomes Mary II of England. England will never be the same. Imagine the coronation. Westminster Abbey, December 1558. A 16-year-old girl with auburn hair and a French accent is crowned Queen of England. Mary Stuart is beautiful, charming, raised in the French court. She speaks French better than English. She's been Queen of Scotland since she was 6 days old. Now she's Queen of England too. And she's married to Francis, the Dauphin of France. Do you understand what this means? When Francis becomes King of France, Mary Stuart will be Queen of France, Queen of England, and Queen of Scotland. The British Isles will be a French satellite state. This is England's worst nightmare realized. The English nobles are horrified, but they have no choice. Mary Stuart is the legitimate heir. She's also a devout Catholic. The Protestant persecution doesn't just continue, it intensifies. Mary II sees Protestantism as a disease to be purged, and she has the power of France behind her. Protestant leaders who fled during Mary I's reign stay in exile. Those who remained in England face a choice: convert, flee, or die. Many choose death. The burnings continue. The executions multiply. England, which in our timeline became the great Protestant power of Europe, is now the Catholic stronghold. And the cultural consequences are about to get devastating. Let's talk about what never happens in this timeline. No William Shakespeare. In our timeline, Shakespeare was born in 1564 and flourished during Elizabeth's reign. The theatre culture of London, the Globe, the playhouses, the explosion of English drama. All of that happened because Elizabeth loved the arts and protected the theaters. In this Catholic-dominated timeline, the theaters are seen as dens of Protestant heresy and moral corruption. They're shut down. The plays that would have defined English literature, Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, are never written. William Shakespeare, born in Stratford-upon-Avon in 1564, becomes a glovemaker like his father. He never writes a single play. No Francis Drake. Drake's circumnavigation of the globe, his raids on Spanish treasure ships, his knighthood from Elizabeth, none of it happens. In this timeline, England is allied with Spain, not fighting it. English exploration stalls. The men who would have been adventurers become soldiers in Spain's wars instead. Drake, a talented sailor, spends his life in the merchant marine, transporting goods between English and Spanish ports. He dies unknown. No Walter Raleigh. No attempts to colonize America. No lost colony of Roanoke. No English presence in the New World. Raleigh becomes a minor courtier under Mary II, never given the charter to explore and colonize that Elizabeth granted him in our timeline. No English Renaissance. The flowering of art, music, poetry, and science that defined Elizabeth's reign never happens. England, which in our timeline became a cultural powerhouse, remains a cultural backwater. The center of English-language culture doesn't shift to London. It stays in Europe, but fractured, scattered among the Protestant exile communities. The English language itself develops differently. Without the standardization that came from Elizabeth's court, from Shakespeare's plays, from the King James Bible, which doesn't get commissioned in this timeline because there's no Protestant King James. English remains a collection of regional dialects. It never becomes the global language. The English you're hearing right now, standardized and recognizable across centuries, doesn't exist in this timeline. Let's return to politics. In July 1559, King Henry II of France dies in a jousting accident. This happens in both timelines. History is strange that way. Some events seem inevitable. His son Francis II becomes King of France. And Francis is married to Mary Stuart, which means Mary is now Queen of France, Queen of England, and Queen of Scotland. The power shift is seismic. France, overnight, has become the dominant power in Europe. The Holy Roman Empire is alarmed. The Protestant German states are terrified. Spain, despite being Catholic, is concerned about France's sudden expansion. But it doesn't last. In December 1560, Francis II dies. He was always sickly, and he dies of an ear infection at age 16. This also happens in our timeline. Mary Stuart is a widow at 18. She's no longer Queen of France. That title passes to Francis's younger brother, Charles IX. But she's still Queen of England and Scotland. She returns to England in 1561 to rule her kingdoms personally. And this is where things get truly complicated. Because Mary Stuart, for all her beauty and charm, is a terrible ruler. In our timeline, Mary Stuart only ruled Scotland, and she made a spectacular mess of it. She married unwisely twice. First to Lord Darnley, a drunken, jealous fool who was mysteriously murdered. Then to the Earl of Bothwell, who was widely suspected of murdering Darnley. The Scottish nobles rebelled. Mary was forced to abdicate. She fled to England, where Elizabeth imprisoned her for 19 years before finally executing her. Now imagine Mary Stuart ruling England. Same terrible judgment. Same disastrous personal choices. But with much, much higher stakes. In this timeline, Mary marries Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, in 1562. It's a scandal that rocks England to its core. Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, had died under suspicious circumstances in 1560, falling downstairs while alone in the house. Everyone suspected murder, though nothing was ever proven. Now, barely 2 years later, the Queen of England is marrying the man suspected of killing his first wife to be free. The English nobles are outraged. They see Dudley as an ambitious upstart manipulating their young queen. The common people are disgusted. Pamphlets circulate calling Mary a whore and Dudley a murderer. Religious tensions worsen. Mary is Catholic, but many of her nobles are secret Protestants or crypto-Protestants who converted under pressure. They hate the burnings, hate the Spanish alliance, hate the French influence at court. In 1565, a group of Protestant nobles led by Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, attempts a coup. The plot is to kidnap Mary, force her to abdicate, and install a regency council that would restore Protestantism. It's discovered at the last minute. Dudley's spies infiltrate the conspiracy. The coup fails. Mary's response is brutal. Norfolk is executed. 50 other conspirators are hanged, drawn, and quartered. Their heads are placed on spikes on London Bridge as a warning. But the executions spark exactly what Mary feared: rebellion. The Northern Rebellion of 1565 is far larger and more dangerous than the historical Northern Rebellion of 1569. The Earls of Northumberland and Westmoreland raise an army of 10,000 men in northern England. They march south, demanding the restoration of Protestantism and the removal of Robert Dudley from power. They have no alternative monarch to rally around. Elizabeth is dead. But they fight anyway for religion and for England. Mary calls in French troops to crush them. French soldiers on English soil, fighting English rebels. It's a nightmare. The rebellion is crushed at the Battle of York in February 1566. Over 3,000 rebels die in the battle. Another 800 are executed afterward. England is held together by force and fear. But the nation is fracturing from within. Trade is suffering. The Protestant merchants who once drove English commerce have fled or been executed. The economy stagnates. The people are hungry, angry, and divided. And Mary's hold on power is more fragile than she realizes. Let's jump ahead to one of the most famous moments in English history. In our timeline, 1588 was the year of the Spanish Armada. Philip II of Spain sent 130 ships to invade Protestant England and overthrow Elizabeth. Elizabeth's navy, led by Francis Drake and Charles Howard, defeated them in one of the greatest naval victories in history. It made England a naval superpower. It marked the beginning of Spain's decline and England's rise. But in this timeline, England and Spain are allies. There is no Spanish Armada sailing against England. Instead, there's a French-English Armada. By 1588, the political situation in Europe has shifted dramatically. Mary II of England is now 45 years old. Still beautiful, but her reign has been marked by repression, rebellion, and economic decline. Spain, under Philip II, has grown concerned about French-English dominance. The balance of power has tipped too far. Philip forms an alliance with the Dutch Protestant rebels, his former enemies, against France and England. It's a cynical alliance of convenience, but it works. In the summer of 1588, a combined French and English fleet of 140 ships set sail to break a Spanish blockade of French ports and land troops in the Netherlands. The Battle of Gravelines is one of the largest naval engagements of the century. And the French-English fleet loses. Spanish naval tactics, refined through decades of experience, prove superior. The Spanish use of longer-range cannon devastates the French and English ships before they can close for boarding. 30 French and English ships are sunk. Thousands of sailors die. England's navy, which in our timeline became legendary, is shattered. The defeat has enormous consequences. England loses its naval tradition before it ever truly begins. The shipyards of Portsmouth and Plymouth fall into decline. Spanish naval dominance continues for another 50 years. And without naval power, England never becomes a colonial power. Let's talk about what that means for the world. In our timeline, England colonized North America starting in the early 1600s. Jamestown in 1607. Plymouth in 1620. Eventually 13 colonies that would become the United States. In this timeline, English colonization never happens. Why? Because England doesn't have the navy, the wealth, or the political will. Mary's England is Catholic, aligned with France and Spain. And Spain already controls colonization of the Americas through the Pope's blessing and the Treaty of Tordesillas. England doesn't challenge it. So who colonizes North America? Primarily France and Spain. New France, which in our timeline was limited to Canada and the Louisiana Territory, expands massively. By 1650, the entire Atlantic coast from Florida to Newfoundland is divided between French and Spanish colonies. The cities that in our timeline are Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston are, in this timeline, French colonial outposts named Nouvelle Rochelle, Nouveau Lyon, Port Marie, and St. Charles. The Mayflower never sails. The Pilgrims, Protestant refugees fleeing persecution, settle in the Netherlands instead, joining the existing exile community. There is no Massachusetts, no Virginia, no city upon a hill. The ideals that would shape American democracy, the town hall meetings, the religious freedom, the English common law traditions never take root in North America. If there's an American Revolution in this timeline, it happens a century later, and it's a French-speaking revolution against the French crown. The United States of America, as we know it, doesn't exist. Not in English. Not with the same ideals. Not at all. By 1600, the world of this alternate timeline looks radically different from ours. England is a second-tier European power. Catholic, French-aligned, economically stagnant, politically repressive. The England of Shakespeare and Elizabeth, the England of exploration and naval power, the England that would build an empire, that England never existed. France is the dominant European power, but overstretched. Controlling England, Scotland, and vast American territories is expensive and difficult. Rebellions flare periodically in England. Each one is crushed, but each one weakens French control a bit more. Spain remains powerful, controlling the Mediterranean, much of the Americas, and the crucial Atlantic trade routes. The Protestant Reformation is fractured and weakened. Without England as a major Protestant power, the movement lacks a strong state sponsor. Protestantism survives in the Netherlands, some German states, and Scandinavia, but it's defensive, embattled, slowly declining. The Catholic Counter-Reformation is triumphant. The Pope's influence is stronger than in our timeline. The Council of Trent's reforms are implemented more thoroughly. The intellectual climate is different too. Science and the Enlightenment develop along different paths. In our timeline, the scientific revolution flourished in Protestant and religiously tolerant countries. England, the Netherlands, later France. In this timeline, the Catholic Church maintains much tighter control over education and intellectual inquiry. Galileo, in this timeline, doesn't just get house arrest for supporting heliocentrism. He's tried by the Inquisition and executed in 1633. His death sends a chilling message to other scientists. Inquiry into certain topics is forbidden. The scientific revolution is delayed by decades, perhaps a full century. René Descartes, fearing persecution, never publishes his philosophical works. He dies unknown. Isaac Newton, born in 1643, grows up in a Catholic England where scientific inquiry is restricted. He becomes a priest instead of a scientist. His laws of motion and gravity are never formulated. The Enlightenment, that great flowering of reason and individual liberty, either doesn't happen or happens very differently, perhaps in the Netherlands or German states. The ideas that would shape modern democracy, the rights of man, separation of church and state, freedom of conscience, spread more slowly and face much fiercer opposition. Technological progress slows to a crawl. The Industrial Revolution, which in our timeline began in England in the 1760s, either doesn't happen or happens much later. Without Newton's physics, without the scientific method flourishing, without the economic and political conditions that England created, the technological leap that created the modern world is delayed. Perhaps it happens eventually in France or the Netherlands in the 1850s or 1870s. But that's a century of progress lost. The modern world we know, democratic, industrialized, connected, arrives 100 years late, if it arrives at all. Let's come back to reality. In our timeline, Mary I didn't sign the warrant. Elizabeth was released from the Tower in May 1554 and sent to house arrest at Woodstock Palace. She spent the next 4 years under constant surveillance, suspected, distrusted, interrogated, but alive. Every day she expected to be arrested again. Every knock on the door could be guards coming to take her back to the Tower. She learned to be careful, to watch what she said, to survive. When Mary I died on November 17, 1558, Elizabeth became queen. She was 25 years old. She inherited a nation that was bankrupt, religiously divided, threatened by Spain and France, and on the brink of civil war. And she transformed it. Over the next 45 years, Elizabeth I established religious stability through the Elizabethan religious settlement, a middle way between Catholicism and extreme Protestantism that most English people could accept. She defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588, one of the most decisive military victories in English history. She sponsored exploration and colonization, backing Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, and others who would lay the groundwork for the British Empire. She presided over a cultural golden age. Shakespeare wrote his plays during her reign. Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, the great flowering of English literature. All of it happened under her patronage. She navigated the treacherous waters of European politics with skill and cunning, playing Spain and France against each other, keeping England independent and powerful. She died in 1603 without an heir but secured a peaceful succession by naming James VI of Scotland as her successor, uniting the English and Scottish crowns. When Elizabeth died at age 69, She left England as one of the most powerful nations in Europe. The world we live in today, the English-speaking world, the democratic traditions, the global reach of English culture and language, all of it traces back to Elizabeth's reign. The United States speaks English because England colonized North America. Modern democracy evolved from English parliamentary traditions. The Industrial Revolution started in England. The scientific method flourished in England. Shakespeare, Newton, Darwin, Churchill, the great English minds who shaped the modern world, they lived in a country Elizabeth built. And she almost never got the chance to build it. Here's what the alternate timeline teaches us. History is fragile. If Mary I had signed that warrant, if one of her advisors had been slightly more persuasive, if the evidence against Elizabeth had been marginally stronger, if Mary had been in a different mood that night, Elizabeth would have died. And the entire world would be different. No Shakespeare, no British Empire, no United States as we know it, no Industrial Revolution starting in England. English as a minor European language. Democracy delayed by a century. Everything we take for granted hinged on one woman surviving. And she barely did. Elizabeth spent her entire life aware of how close she'd come to death. She never forgot that walk through Traitor's Gate. She never forgot the sound of her mother's execution being described to her. It made her cautious, calculating, strategic. It also made her one of the greatest rulers in human history. But it reminds us that history doesn't have to turn out the way it did. The world we live in is the product of 1,000 narrow escapes, lucky breaks, and individuals who refused to give up when all hope seemed lost. Elizabeth, sitting in that tower cell in March 1554, had no idea she would become queen. No idea she would defeat the Spanish Armada. No idea her name would become synonymous with a golden age. All she knew was that she was 20 years old, accused of treason, and she wanted to live. She survived by being smarter than her enemies, by never giving them quite enough evidence to convict her, by enduring. And because she did, because Mary hesitated, because Elizabeth was Henry VIII's daughter and Mary couldn't quite bring herself to sign, because history balanced on a knife's edge and fell the right way, the world changed. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this journey through one of history's most fascinating what-ifs. Here at Ash and Crown History, we don't just tell you what happened. We make you understand how close we came to losing everything. We show you the moments when history could have gone either way. If you want more deep dives like this, more alternate histories, more forgotten stories, more moments that changed the world, subscribe to Ash and Crown History. Hit that like button if this one made you think. And tell me in the comments, what other historical what-ifs should we explore? What if Abraham Lincoln survived Ford's Theater? What if Rome never fell? What if the atomic bomb wasn't ready in time for World War II? What if the Library of Alexandria was never burned? Your suggestions shape what we cover next. And here's something to think about as you go about your day. The fact that you're watching this video in English on a platform created in an English-speaking country, shaped by English-speaking culture, influenced by English democratic traditions, all of that exists because a 38-year-old queen in 1554 couldn't quite bring herself to sign her sister's death warrant. One signature, one moment of hesitation, one young woman surviving when everyone expected her to die. And the world we know was born. History is fragile. Democracy is fragile. Freedom is fragile. The things we take for granted, the right to speak freely, to worship as we choose, to question authority. Those things were won by people who risked everything. People like Elizabeth, who spent 3 weeks in the Tower waiting to die and came out determined to build something better. Never take it for granted. Next time on Ash and Crown History, we're exploring another moment when everything hung in the balance. A man escapes from exile on a small island and returns to France with a handful of loyal soldiers. For 100 days, he terrifies Europe, raises an army, and threatens to reshape the continent. The return of Napoleon, when history almost repeated itself, and the great powers of Europe held their breath wondering if the nightmare would begin again. Thanks for watching. This is Ash and Crown History, where the past is never boring. See you in the next one.